This is Entertainment for Review with another installment in the Friday the 13th series. Today I'm going to be taking a look at 1984's Friday the 13th, the final chapter. For the first time since the series debuted in 1980, they missed a year. They had movies in 1980, 1981, and 1982. They missed 83, and now we're back in 84. And as you can tell by the title, the final chapter, they never knew how big this series was going to become and how many movies it was going to contain. And so at one point, this was viewed as their stop point. Please, as always, be aware that if you haven't seen this movie, this review will be containing spoilers. And let's start our review of Friday the 13th, the final chapter. Now to start off with, as did parts 2 and 3, this movie gives a recap of what's happened up until this point. And it picks up on the nights of all the murders at Higgins Haven. We now see it swarmed with police and ambulances as they're coming in and removing all the dead bodies, including one ambulance that's come to claim Jason's body. They load him onto a stretcher, and as is almost mandatory in a horror movie when you have a body on a stretcher, his hand falls down, giving the paramedic a bit of a jump. They drop him off at the morgue, and there's a technician there, Axel, who is trying to have some fun with the nurse after he's done for the day. We see Jason stir a little bit beneath the sheet, so he knows that he's not really dead as thought. Axel and the nurse get the same jump scare as Jason's hand again falls down. This causes the nurse to leave and go back to her work, and Axel goes back to watching TV until Jason comes up behind him with a surgical saw and cuts his throat and then twists his head around. He then goes in the next room and kills the nurse by stabbing her with a scalpel. Jason then makes his return to the Crystal Lake area to continue his multi-day killing spree. We then see Trish Jarvis and her mother jogging, and they return to their cabin where we see Tommy Jarvis, played by another one of the notable actors from this series, Corey Feldman. They note that their neighboring cabin has been rented to a group of 6 teenagers. And then we see this group on their way to Crystal Lake, comprised of Paul, Samantha, Doug, Sarah, Ted, and Jimmy. An interesting part, at one point they come at a stop next to a small cemetery, and we see the headstone of Pamela Voorhees. As they continue on, they see a hitchhiker who tries to flag them down, but they are full, so they continue on. This is fortunate for them and unfortunate for the hitchhiker, as moments later she's killed by Jason, who makes some unfortunate grunting noises while doing so. After the group gets settled into their cabin, the next day they go for a hike. Along the way they meet 2 twins, Tina and Terry, and all go for a group skinny dip, where they are observed by Tommy and Trish, who stumble across their area. The only one who doesn't join in on the swim is Sarah. Sam tries to get her to join but refuses, and then pulls a prank on her, pretending to have drowned, and then pulls her into the lake. After having left, Trish and Tommy have some car trouble along the way, and Tommy's attempting to fix it, and they get some help from a man named Rob who just seems to walk up out of the woods. As explanation, he says he's there to bear hunt, something that Tommy seems skeptical, and he's curious if there are other teenagers in the area. I don't know where he's meant to be heading, but they drive him back to their house, and Tommy shows him his collection of masks and other Hollywood movie effect items he's made, which you gotta admit for a 12-year-old are all very impressive. Later that night, Rob heads out to continue his journey. Meanwhile, we've joined our group of teenagers who are all having a party at the house, and they're joined by the 2 twins that they met on their walk, and one of these twins seems to have taken an interest in Paul, who of course has a girlfriend with him, Samantha, and although there are 2 available men at this party. This frustrates Samantha, so she decides to go off on her own to have a swim. She swims out to an inflatable raft. After sitting there for a few moments, Jason comes up out of the water and stabs her through the bottom of the raft. Paul does finally start to feel bad, so he leaves and goes out to find Samantha. He swims out to her in the raft and notices she's dead. In a panic, he starts to swim back to the dock, but is intercepted by Jason right before he gets there. He's stabbed with a spear gun, and then Jason fires it into him. All of Jason's previous kills in the last 2 movies have been land-based, so it's interesting to see him taking to the lake to get some aquatic kills. Paul's screams are overheard by Rob at his campsite, and he grabs a machete and starts stalking down towards the woods. But then he hears something behind him and sees someone stalking through his camp, and he makes his way back. He checks inside his tent and sees that his rifle has been broken. Back at the party, Tina is upstairs with Jimmy, and Terry has gotten tired of Ted, and she decided she wants to leave. She goes upstairs and tries to get Tina, who refuses to go, so she heads out on her own. She heads out into the rain and is about to leave when she's attacked by Jason and killed next. She's impaled and then slammed into the side of the house. Miss Jarvis arrives back at the Jarvis household, and the power seems to be out. She's looking for her kids but doesn't find them. She goes outside, searching, and then is caught off guard and looks shocked. And Trish and Tommy return to the house. They don't find their mother. Trish goes out looking for her and stumbles across Rob's campsite. He slashes open the side of the tent with a machete, surprised that someone was in it, giving Trish a bit of a shock. Back at the cabin with the teenagers, Jimmy has just slept with Tina, and he goes downstairs to brag to Ted. He goes into the kitchen to get some wine, and he's looking for a corkscrew. Turns out Jason had it. He stabs it through his hand and then hits him in the face with a meat cleaver. He then, moments later, goes after Tina. She's upstairs. She looks out the window and notices that her sister's bike is still there, even though she thought she had left. She's looking out a window, but then Jason crashes through the window, standing up on the side of the house, grabs her, pulls her out, and she falls to her death, hitting a car on the way down, then the ground. Back with Trish and Rob, Rob is telling Trish why he's really there, and that's that he's there to look for Jason and kill him because Jason killed his sister Sandra, who died in part 2, which would have only been days before this. Trish says that Jason's dead, but Rob says that his body disappeared from the morgue and he thinks that he's still alive, and that's why he's here looking for him. Trish then gets worried, realizing that she left Tommy back home alone. And we see Tommy venturing down to the basement to try to fix the electricity. Back at the other house, Jason's now moved back inside, and he goes after Ted next. Ted is going closer to the projection screen that he's been watching a movie on. The film comes off to the projector, and he turns around and is temporarily blinded, and then is stabbed through the screen through the back of the head by Jason. He then moves upstairs where Sarah and Doug had been in the shower together. Sarah leaves to go get ready for bed, and Jason goes in and breaks through the shower door and smashes Doug's head against the shower wall barehanded. Jason is a little rough for wear in this movie. Of course, he's showing the damage from the previous movie, but also his hands look a little different and his fingernails look dirty and rough. Sarah returns to the bathroom and sees Doug dead. In a panic, she runs downstairs and tries to leave the cabin. However, when she's at the door, she's hit by an axe through the door, killing her. Over at the Jarvis household, Tommy hears some noise and is slowly coming down the stairs. The power is back on. He hears someone trying to get in the door, and it is Rob and Trish, and they break the glass in order to get into Trish's own house. Tommy says their mother's still not back. When Trish tries to call for help, Jason takes out the phone lines outside, and Rob and Trish decide to go to the neighboring house to investigate. They see the damage to the door and think that Jason is there or could still be there. They go inside. Shortly after they're inside, the power to the outhouse goes out, and Rob decides to go check the basement. Now, the Jarvis' dog Gordon had come along, and he's acting nervous, and then he decides to get the heck out of there and leaps through a window. Probably the smartest one in the bunch. Sarah moves upstairs to investigate. We see Tommy back at the house discovers the articles about Jason in Rob's pack. Trish discovers the body of Doug upstairs in the upstairs bathroom and runs downstairs to find Rob. They go back upstairs, and then he trips on the stairs and goes to run back down, and Jason leaps out of the shadows and attacks Rob and begins killing him. Now, Rob definitely gets the most dramatic death award as he's yelling for Trish to run, saying he's killing me, he's killing me. And Trish does flee upstairs momentarily, but then decides to run back to the basement, perhaps to attempt to help, but finds Rob's dead body, but doesn't see Jason. She attempts to go back upstairs, but Jason reaches through the stairs and grabs her leg, and she slashes at his arm with the machete. She then attempts to make an escape, but Jason has set up the usual gambit of dead bodies that she runs across. Some of these are a little questionable because it seems like he wouldn't have had time to put these in place since they had gotten there. But you can't always look for sense in a horror movie. He manages to get out of the house and runs for it. Jason is in pursuit, coming out of the house by himself. Now, this is another interesting thing, because Trish makes it back to the house with Tommy and then begins to try to barricade themselves inside. She's locking windows and even nails the door shut. As I said, we saw Jason come out of the other house by himself in pursuit, and we can assume that Rob's body was still in the basement. But moments later, Jason tosses Rob's body through their window. He then crashes through another window, grabbing Tommy. She attacks him with a hammer, which he seems to be ignoring mostly until she hits him with the claw part to the neck. But that only slows him down momentarily, as seconds later he comes just bursting through the nailed shut door, walking right through it. They really upped Jason's physicality in this movie. Trish and Tommy retreat upstairs and attempt to barricade themselves in Tommy's bedroom. This doesn't work as Jason quickly begins hacking apart the door. As he's trying to reach inside, she picks up a TV monitor and smashes it over his head. So we get some blunt force trauma and possibly some electrocution, causing him to collapse outside the door. They try to sneak past, but Jason regains consciousness and he swings his axe at Trish. He's not sure who to go after first, but chooses Trish and chases her down. She's in a pursuit and she runs back to the other cabin. Jason is right on her tail the whole time, and when they get back to the other cabin, he chases her upstairs. She's trapped, so she dive bombs through the window, crashing to the ground outside. Now, luckily it was raining and the ground was soft with mud, so she doesn't seem to have taken too much damage. Before Jason gets downstairs, she manages to regain her footing and start moving again. Tommy seems to have come up with a plan of his own on the other side. He has the picture of Jason's artist rendition as a child from Rob's newspaper, and it seems as though he's going to put some of his makeup artist training to good work. He begins cutting his hair and shaving parts of his head. Trish slowly has made it back to their cabin, and she thought Tommy would have left, but he hadn't, so she's worried. Jason slowly walks in behind her, and they begin a battle. Now, this version of Jason is again much more aggressive, it appears. He is not worried about taking damage. He is walking right at her, even though she is swinging a machete at him, and even takes a blow to the hand, pretty much splitting his hand in two down the middle. But this doesn't dissuade him. He continues his attack straight forward. She even hits him right across the chest with the machete, and he continues his attack and pins her to the ground. Now, Tommy has returned, and he has made himself look like Jason as a child and attempts to play some psychological warfare, calling to Jason and asking if he remembers him. This does seem to work as Jason is distracted and walks towards Tommy. This gives Trish time to grab the machete machete and strike at Jason. All she manages to do, though, is knock his mask off, revealing his face, which is even more gnarly than in the previous movie. Still deformed, and they almost made his face look more ghoulish. And instead of being completely bald this time, they have given him some more wisps of dangling hair. He begins to advance on Trish again, but this gives Tommy time to grab the machete and land a blow right to Jason's face. Collapses, and it almost feels like part of his head is going to come apart. Trish and Tommy are hugging, and then he sees Jason's hand begin to move, and he panics and seems to snap a little bit as he grabs the machete and begins hacking Jason over and over again, yelling, "Die, die." We then cut to the hospital where Trish is in the bed and the doctors are telling her she'll need surgery, but they can wait till she's healed up a bit. She asks about Tommy, and they say that he's fine. He may have snapped in the moment a little bit, but that's perfectly normal under the circumstances. Then asks if they can see him, and they say they'll send him in. They send Tommy in, and they hug, but over her shoulder, Tommy still gives a bit of a deranged look. And that is how this film ends. This is the first of the films without a big shock moment at the end that we've seen in the first three. However, in the bonus features of the DVD, there is a brief scene that could have been used that would have been a dream sequence similar to the ending of the other films, in which Trish wakes up the morning after the events and goes upstairs and finds her mother's dead body in the bathtub. She's then attacked again by Jason, only to then wake up in the hospital. I think it's for the best that didn't make it into the movie. I think that gives this movie a distinct feel from the others up to this point. An interesting point in the series is that parts 2, 3, and 4 are all supposed to be within a couple of days of each other. You even get a character in this movie, Rob, who is coming to seek justice for his sister who was killed in part 2. But that's what I'm curious about. Why is it only one person? You would think after one group of teenagers gets murdered in part 2, and another group of teenagers gets murdered in part 3, and surely the police know that Jason's body left the hospital, you would think they would have just shut down the lake and told everybody to leave until they could deem it safe again. I guess they really needed those tourist dollars. Now the plot is still largely the same. Jason is just hell-bent on killing teenagers, whoever comes in this area around Camp Crystal Lake. Now Jason has again gone through some physical transformation. He's dressed the same in this movie as he was in part 3, and he's wearing the same hockey mask, and I like the attention to detail that his mask is showing the wound from the previous movie. One thing that's always bothered me is that on some of the cover art for this movie, the mask is shown on the cover with the wound on the wrong side of the mask. In this movie, Jason's skin seems to have more of a little sickly color to it, just has an odd shade. As I mentioned earlier, his hands are a little bit more wild looking, and he has these big, dark, dirty looking fingernails that he didn't have in the other movies. When they do show his face again in this movie, his face is just different looking. He still has the physical deformity, but it's never very consistent. It always looks a little bit different in each movie. In this movie, his face looks pretty gnarly, and like I said earlier, almost kind of ghoulish. Now, this is the first movie where I feel like they've pumped up Jason's physical attributes to the point where he's almost becoming like some sort of juggernaut. Just 2 movies ago in part 2, Jason was struggling in physical hand-to-hand combat with another man about his size, was taking significant damage from blows from a woman who was much smaller than him that were able to take him off his feet for moments at a time. And even in part 3, Jason has trouble in some of the combat situations, and he is definitely trying to avoid physical damage to himself. There's a moment in part 3 where Chris is slashing a knife at him and he's trying to dodge it as best he can, and in each movie it takes him a good amount of time to recover from serious blows. In this movie, however, he's just taking massive blows. At one point, Trish is hitting him directly in the head with a hammer, and he is just phasing off those blows. He displays tremendous amounts of strength not shown before, such as just walking through the door to the Jarvis cabin, crushing one of his victim's skulls one-handed. When he faces off with Trish, he walks headfirst into her attacks, not even trying to really defend himself that much. And even when she splits his hand practically in 2, he just keeps coming forward. The decision was clearly made in this movie just to make Jason more of an unstoppable force than he had been before. Jason steps it up in this movie and racks up an impressive 14 kills, his most so far in any movie. Starting out at the hospital, he kills Axel and Nurse Robbie. He then kills the hitchhiker on his way back to Crystal Lake. Next, he kills Samantha and Paul in the lake. Then he kills Terry outside. Next, he kills Mrs. Jarvis, but her death occurs off screen, so we don't know how. Next, in the cabin, he kills Jimmy, Tina, Ted, Doug, and Sarah. And then later, he kills Rob. And the final death is Jason himself. Now, this also causes one of the things I have issues with in the movie, because some of his movements for this don't seem to make a lot of sense, and have even spawned an online fan theory that Jason has the ability to teleport. Let's look at a series of events. One moment, he's in the kitchen killing Jimmy. Next, he's back outside, standing on the side of the house, and pulls Tina out the window. Then he's back in the kitchen and moves on and kills Ted in the living room, before moving upstairs to kill Doug in the bathroom. And then he's back outside when he kills Sarah, killing her by hitting her with an axe from the outside of the door. Later, he's observing Trish, Tom, and Rob in the Jarvis cabin and takes out their phone line. And when they go to the other cabin to investigate, he's in the basement there. Also, in the midst of this, he had time to put dead bodies in positions that they weren't when they arrived. Some of this may be attributed to them just not taking continuity into thought. Or maybe Jason really can teleport around. And at moments it makes me wonder if they showed some of the deaths out of order, which would make more sense, such as if he killed Terry outside, then climbed up on the house and killed Tina, then came in through the kitchen and killed Jimmy, and then went to the living room and killed Ted. Or Jason is just one heck of a quiet speed demon, who's really hustling when the camera's not on him. This movie also introduces a new recurring character, which is Tommy Jarvis, who's going to appear in the next couple of movies after this. Another reason I thought there might not be a shock ending and dream sequence ending at the end of this movie is because they did think that this was going to be the final movie and that this would be the end of Jason. But 1 year later, in 1985, they're at it again. This movie did not do very well critically, but a little bit better than its predecessor. On Rotten Tomatoes, it got a 24% score from critics and a 51% score from audiences. And over on IMDb, it got an audience score of a 6 out of 10. For me, I score this movie at a 6.5 out of 10. Please be sure to let me know your thoughts on Friday the 13th, the final chapter, in the comments section below. Please be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel, and keep an eye out for my next video coming soon, which will feature Friday the 13th Part 5, A New Beginning.